There's enough time for the heart to stop beating, for there to be no circulation due to the wounds that I examined from the medical examiner's office. None of the wounds have any blood in them, which tells me that they're all ante-mortem wounds.
Welcome to SpillHood, the spot where we break down the real drama, the real evidence, and the real street conversations. And now, we got fresh footage that just hit the internet and is flipping the whole YNW Melly situation upside down.
Did you recognize the individual that got into the back seat on the left side, the rear driver's side?
Yes.
And who was that individual?
Jamel.
And Jamel, is that the defendant, Jamel Demons?
Yes, ma'am.
New clips just surfaced, and the streets are buzzing because this angle makes the case look way different than what people thought before everything went down. Melly and Bortlen were caught on camera, and folks online are already saying this could shift the whole timeline of that night. Let me break it down, because the prosecution is acting like they finally locked in what they needed. After Bortlen took that plea deal, people started paying extra close attention to the evidence the state been holding back, and once you see how it's lined up, you'll understand why Melly's team been moving like every step gotta be perfect. Investigators came with 7 major pieces of evidence that they claim proves Melly was involved, each one built to shut down that drive-by story and place him in the back seat with a firearm in his hand. But the piece that's got everyone talking is that studio surveillance footage. That camera at New Era Recording Studios caught Melly, Bortlen, Sack Chaser, and Juvie leaving together around 4:09 a.m. on October 26, 2018. And prosecutors say the exact spot they pulled up at is what made them confident enough to push this case forward.
Determination was that this is not a drive-by shooting. Shooter's at a stationary position when all but one of these rounds are going in.
During the trial, the victim's mother had to sit there and watch that heartbreaking footage and identify her son on the screen, which only made the courtroom even more tense. That clip shows Melly sliding into the left rear seat, the same exact spot where ballistic experts said those fatal shots came from. This one piece of footage completely crushes the defense's whole claim that Melly wasn't even inside the car when everything went down. His legal team been looking stressed because the forensic breakdown paints a story the investigators say nobody can twist. They couldn't find a single sign that shots came from outside the vehicle.
This is the actual crime scene on US 27 Pembroke Road.
And approximately where along Pembroke Road on this map were those casings discovered?
Not one mark, not one hole, nothing that matches a drive-by. And it gets even worse for the defense because that driver's side window was shattered from the inside, not the outside. Crime scene reconstruction specialist Sergeant Christopher Williams stepped up during the first trial and dropped testimony that had the courtroom locked in. He explained how they found 8 shell casings inside the car from 2 different firearms, a .40 caliber and a .45 caliber, which lined up with the angle of every wound.
Specifically the one that is seen in the individual in the black and white jacket.
Correct.
Did Mr. Henry have possession of either of those satchels or man purses at the hospital?
No, ma'am.
The trajectory analysis pointed straight to the seat Melly was sitting in, not to any unknown person outside the car. And when investigators lined up the timing of the injuries, it made the situation look even more serious for Melly's side. Sergeant Williams explained how investigators figured out both victims were no longer alive by the time that so-called drive-by scene was staged. The evidence suggested Sack Chaser and Juvie were already gone before anyone fired shots from outside the vehicle, making the whole setup look calculated and planned out. Melly's DNA was found all over the left rear door handle of the Jeep, putting him right in the spot investigators say the shooter was sitting. The defense tried to spin it, saying it only proved he was inside the car earlier. But once you stack that with the surveillance footage, it starts forming a picture the prosecutors feel confident showing in court. The wild part is they didn't find any attack residue on Melly's hands, and his defense team keeps using that to claim he never fired anything. But prosecutors fired back saying it doesn't prove anything, especially because so much time passed before they were able to run those tests. Then the tech evidence came in, and that's where things got real heavy. Melly's phone pinged right next to the exact location where the tragic mysteries happened, putting him somewhere he said he wasn't.
This is huge, and this is one of the biggest nightmares that any prosecutor could face, where you're getting taken off the case and now being called as a witness in said case.
Detective Mark Moretti broke down those phone pings piece by piece, and it lined up too clean for the prosecution to ignore. But the digital trail didn't stop there. Investigators said they found an Instagram DM that Melly supposedly sent where he wrote, "shh," which only made the situation look even more suspicious. Investigators said that in that Instagram DM, Melly supposedly replied, "I did that," when someone asked about the tragic mysteries. And if that message is real, it's basically a confession typed straight on social media. One of the wildest parts of this whole situation is what happened to the suspected firearms afterward. During Detective Polo's testimony, he revealed details that had the courtroom locked in because some key items mysteriously disappeared. The recording studio cameras showed both Melly and Bortlen holding bags when they left with the victims, but when Bortlen arrived at the hospital with the two men, those bags were nowhere in sight. Legal experts believe those bags might have held the firearms investigators never recovered. And if that's true, it sounds like someone made sure those items vanished quick.
That YNW Bortlen is not going to be a flipper, and he is not going to be the cheese eater I previously said that he could become. And he is going to give a statement. I don't know what that statement's going to be, but his attorney is an excellent attorney. He's one of my good friends and you know, really helped me out as a young attorney. Fred Haddad, a great guy. And he represented very, very few, if any, flippers in the past.
That's the type of cleanup people usually see in organized setups. The prosecution put in major work trying to explain why Melly would allegedly harm his own crew. Gang specialist Danny Polo testified that Melly had ties to a group known as the Sign Bloods, and that taking out Sack Chaser and Juvie could have helped him financially and boosted his position within that circle exclamation mark. Text messages between the group showed serious tension building before the tragedy. Sack Chaser was frustrated, feeling like Melly was getting all the spotlight while he was the one putting in effort behind the scenes. Money and respect, two things that have ended more crews than almost anything else out here. Those texts heated up fast once Sack Chaser started arguing with Melly's mother about business moves in the neighborhood. And when family gets dragged into the mix, situations can turn dangerous real quick. The prosecution's whole theory is that after Melly allegedly harmed his own crew inside the car, he and Bortlen drove to another spot and fired shots into the SUV from the outside to stage it like a drive-by. But the forensic breakdown tore that whole story apart. The blood patterns and bullet paths didn't match anything close to a real drive-by scene. On top of that, investigators said there were no bullet holes on the right side of the vehicle, which is exactly where real drive-by shots would have hit. And the way both defendants acted when they reached the hospital set off even more alarms. Security footage caught Bortlen switching his clothes like he was trying to ditch something that could have tied him to the scene.
So theoretically, Phillips said Bortlen could now be called as a witness in Melly's upcoming trial. He could testify for Melly or against Melly. But my guess is if he's agreeing to do a proffer, he's going to snitch. I expect that to be the case, Phillips said. If they subpoena him, he can no longer take the Fifth Amendment on these issues.
Hospital workers also said Bortlen looked lost and kept changing his explanation about what happened, which made everything look even more suspicious. And what had people talking even more was the fact that Melly didn't show up at the hospital at all. Even though these were supposed to be his closest friends, most people would be at the door demanding updates if something happened to their day ones. The most heated part of the prosecution's plan is how they're trying to use Melly's own lyrics against him. They want to bring in tracks like Murder on My Mind to argue it shows his mindset, but the defense is fighting back hard. Prosecutors originally wanted to use over 100 songs, but the appeals court is still deciding whether those lyrics can actually be used as evidence. Prosecutors also want to bring in a promotional video, but that's still tied up in appeals because the court is trying to figure out how far they can go when using artistic expression as evidence.
At the end of the day, Mr. Henry knows what happened. He was in the car, but he wasn't the shooter. And so finally, after all these years, for him to plead no contest, even though he was adjudicated guilty and accepted responsibility for this, in part, was fatal.
The whole system is still wrestling with where the line is between creativity and criminal proof, and this case is turning into one of the biggest examples of that. Even with all this evidence on the table, Melly's defense keeps arguing that the state built its case on assumptions and sloppy investigative work. They keep pointing at the missing fatal wound residue on Melly, the fact that the suspected firearms were never found, and claims that officers mishandled parts of the investigation. The defense also highlighted how Detective Mark Moretti admitted he threatened witnesses with deportation and jail time, which raises real questions about how reliable some of that testimony really is. But here's where the pressure kicked in. Once Bortlen took that plea deal and admitted the tragedy happened inside the car and that he helped stage the scene afterward, the defense's entire strategy got hit hard. They can't claim it was a real drive-by anymore, and they can't say no crime happened at all. Now they gotta convince the jury that Melly specifically wasn't the one who pulled that trigger. And that's a tough pitch when all the other evidence is pointing right at him. People in the streets been waiting for real answers since 2018, and this evidence package is exactly why prosecutors think they finally locked down their suspect. But evidence is one thing. Convincing a jury beyond a reasonable doubt, especially in a case this complicated, is something completely different. And that's exactly where the defense was gearing up to make their most desperate move to protect their client's future.
You guys are so criminal-minded and caught up into this street culture where black people aren't even...
As YNW Melly's retrial gets closer, his legal team is walking straight into what you could call a nightmare scenario. After Bortlen's plea deal confirmed the incident happened inside the car and that he helped cover it up. The entire defense plan had to be flipped upside down, and what went down next exposed major cracks on both sides, the prosecution and the defense, showing just how messy this whole situation got out here. From the jump, Melly's defense strategy had the whole hip-hop world arguing and picking sides. Back in the 2023 trial, defense attorney David Howard straight up pointed the finger at Bortlen for the tragic mysteries, telling the jury those were Bortlen's lies. He lies about where the incident occurred, he lies about how it occurred, and he lies about not having the phone. That move had social media calling it straight up snitching on their own co-defendant.
All right, Mr. Henry, I'm not quite sure how your lawyers managed to do this, but I wish you good luck, sir.
People online were flooding comments like, YNW Melly and his defense put all the blame on Bortlen in the first trial, so technically they both told. Others were saying, remember Melly's lawyer's opening statement. He tried to make YNW Bortlen the shooter. No way Bortlen don't turn state after that. The streets were debating nonstop. The defense built their whole argument around a few major points that had the courtroom split. Howard stressed that Bortlen tested positive for fatal wound residue while Melly didn't, and they tried to use that as proof that Bortlen was the one who fired those shots, not Melly. They were basically telling the jury the wrong man was being blamed. The defense only brought in one witness, Melly's friend Adrian A.D. Davis, who claimed Melly was asleep at the house when everything went down.
So the freeforms to me look like in the 19 case as to the 2 counts of accessory after the fact, as well as to all 4 counts. In the 23 case, these are going to be adjudication, 10 years Florida State Prison, followed by, let's say, 6 years probation.
That testimony was supposed to plant doubt, but with everything happening around them, it wasn't the solid move they hoped for. Davis said he learned about the situation at the exact same moment as Melly, and that his friend was just chilling in shorts and a t-shirt when the news hit, trying to show he wasn't anywhere near the scene. The defense pushed hard on their angle that Detective Mark Moretti was too focused on Melly from the start, claiming he was targeting him because of his fame and the reputation he carried in the streets. They highlighted how Moretti openly admitted he threatened witnesses with jail time and deportation, which made a lot of people question whether the investigation was handled fairly. That kind of pressure on witnesses had the courtroom side-eyeing the whole process. But the drama didn't stop with the police. The prosecution ran into their own scandal. In a twist nobody expected, lead prosecutor Christine Bradley got removed from the case after being accused of hiding evidence from the defense team. The issue centered around a police witness who allegedly asked another officer to lie about being present during a search warrant, which set off major alarms. Legal expert Melba Pearson broke down how serious this was, explaining that the defense had every right to demand Bradley be taken off the case so they could call her as a witness and expose the detective who was accused of encouraging false statements. This switch-up shook the entire prosecution team. With Bradley gone, new prosecutors had to step in and try to learn 5 years' worth of complicated case details with barely any time before the retrial, and the defense wasn't doing much better. They were dealing with their own behind-the-scenes chaos while prepping for one of the biggest fights of their client's life.
So here's what happens. He goes and he testifies, or talks to the prosecutor in a proffer. His lawyer's there, the agents on the case are there, the prosecutor's there. They ask him whatever they want, right? And nothing he says can be held against him in that proffer. Nothing. And this is what they call a snitch session.
In August 2025, Melly fired his previous lawyers during prosecutor investigation into potential witness tampering. His new legal squad, Carrie Hua and Drew Finland, inherited a case that had gotten way more complicated after Bland's plea deal. Reports suggest Melly blamed the lawyer change on prosecutorial interference, though the exact circumstances around why his legal team got dismissed remain unclear to the streets. With Bortlen no longer a co-defendant, the defense lost a crucial advantage. Defense attorney Bradford Cohen explained what this meant in the street, but other legal experts weren't so optimistic about what Bland's cooperation might mean. Attorney Bruce Rivers predicted something real was about to go down. Through all this legal back and forth, the families of Anthony Williams and Christopher Thomas Jr. been waiting almost 7 years. Foreclosure attorney John M. Phillips, who's repping Christopher Thomas's family, been handling both criminal and civil aspects of the case. Phillips explained the family's view of Bland's plea deal. The civil case adds another layer because Bland's plea deal means he can't plead the fifth in civil depositions. This could provide additional ways to establish what really went down on October 26, 2018, in them streets. This case exposed major tensions in hip-hop culture around loyalty, success, and street credibility. Figures like Charleston White brought harsh criticism of how the community responds to these situations. Some critics said this whole situation showed a bigger issue, that the culture sometimes rallies behind high-profile defendants just because they're famous, even when the evidence looks rough.
No. His attorney said no, he will not testify. The only thing that's going to happen based on what his attorney said is he only got to answer a couple questions from the state, and then he got to go serve his time. And
fans jump in to defend their favorite artist no matter what's on the table, and that's exactly what people were pointing out in the streets. Even after years of court fights, retrials, delays, lawyer switches, and new strategies, the core evidence hasn't really changed. That studio footage still shows Melly getting into the same seat investigators say the shots came from. The ballistics breakdown still shuts down the drive-by story, and the digital data still places Melly's phone right at the scene. The difference now is the legal situation around that evidence. Once Bortlen took that plea deal and confirmed everything happened inside the vehicle, the defense lost their biggest angles. They can't say nothing happened, and they can't say it was a real drive-by anymore. Now they gotta prove Melly didn't fire any shots, which is way tougher when the state has all these pieces lined up. And listen, wow, when your close friend turns around and admits what went down, things go from complicated to explosive real fast. The YNW Melly case got messy overnight, and I'm not even exaggerating. September 9th, 2025 became the date that flipped the whole case upside down. YNW Bortlen walked into that Broward County courtroom and took a plea deal that had the entire community shocked. What happened in that courtroom was nothing like what people expected, and even Judge Michael Usan looked completely thrown off when it happened. Judge Usan straight up told Bortlen he couldn't understand how his lawyers managed to pull off a deal that smooth. And this wasn't some regular plea deal. This was the kind of deal people dream about when they're staring down the worst charges imaginable. Bortlen was originally facing life or even the highest penalty for 2 first-degree tragic mysteries counts. Yet somehow he walked out with 10 years and 6 years of probation afterward. That's what people call finessing the system on a different level. For years, both Melly and Bortlen stood firm, claiming they were innocent. Melly's first trial back in 2023 ended with a hung jury. 9 said not guilty, 3 said guilty, which set up a retrial for January 2027, giving his team extra time to rebuild their whole strategy from the ground up. But then, September 9th came and flipped everything upside down. The courtroom vibe that day was rough.
I look like taking the deal that hurt my... I look like giving a... how y'all feel? I'm a young fly. Be back to raising hell, prevail.
Only around 8 people showed up to support Bortlen, including Melly's mother and little brother. Nobody from 100K Track showed up, and nobody from Juvie's or Sack Chase's families came through either. The whole room felt empty, like everyone had already walked away from him. The deal Bortlen got was simple but serious. He pled guilty to accessory after the fact and witness tampering, and in exchange, the tragedies charges that could have locked him up forever got dropped. But here's where things turned spicy. That plea came with what they call a proffer agreement. That means authorities wanted Bortlen to sit down and talk, giving them information in exchange for protection from having those statements used directly against him later. Attorney Bruce Rivers explained that in the streets, a setup like that usually means the investigators want details they couldn't reach before. And Bortlen was now the one holding those answers, and the streets immediately started buzzing about whether Bortlen was about to talk against his friend, and the rumors spread fast. Attorney John M. Phillips, who represents one of the victims' families, said Bortlen agreeing to sit down for a proffer could give prosecutors the missing pieces they've been trying to connect, possibly making their case against Melly way stronger. But Bortlen's lawyer, Fred Haddett, shut all that talk down quick. He went on record saying, "I don't represent snitches," and insisted Bortlen wasn't about to turn on Melly or put him in danger. Haddett said the proffer would be limited and that Bortlen wasn't going to testify in court against his former co-defendant under any circumstances. The confusion in the community was wild. Some people were convinced this was straight up cooperating, while others said it was just smart legal strategy to protect himself after facing the possibility of a life sentence. Reporter Saidi Nash, who was actually sitting inside the courtroom catching every detail, stepped in and cleared things up. Nash reported that the cooperation would be minimal and wouldn't directly put Melly at risk, which went against all the early street rumors calling Bortlen a full-on informant. This made the situation even harder to read. And the timing, that's what really got people talking. They had 250 potential jurors scheduled to show up the very next morning, and a ton of money and preparation already invested into starting the trial. Then Bortlen flipped at the last second. To many, it looked like either his legal team panicked, or the prosecution dropped an offer he simply couldn't walk away from.
When pleading to an accessory to murder after the fact, you have to acknowledge that the murder happened and you assisted someone or in some way to cover the murder. Now, if Melly's statement is, how do we know there was a murder? And then secondly, how do we know who did the murder? Because they said it was a drive-by.
The moment that really shook everybody came the day after his sentencing. Bortlen hopped on a jail phone and dropped a whole freestyle addressing the snitch rumors head on, and the internet lit up instantly. That freestyle was his way of telling the streets he didn't turn on his people, even though the deal he took had some folks thinking he switched sides. He was basically saying he did what he had to do to survive the system, but he wasn't about to help put his friend on death row. That was the message he was trying to send, loud and clear. Not long after, Bortlen got shipped off to state prison, where they shaved his dreads and processed him into the system. Going from rising rap talent to state inmate is a reality check that hits different. And that kind of transition can change any young man's mindset real fast. But DJ Academics had another angle that shook the whole hip-hop community. His breakdown had people looking at the situation way deeper. Academics pointed out something major that a lot of folks didn't catch. Even though Bortlen didn't testify, his plea deal still confirmed that the tragedy happened inside the vehicle and that he helped clean it up afterward. That part alone could seriously hurt Melly's defense because their entire strategy was built on the drive-by idea. The same story both of them held on to for years. Now that one piece was gone, the defense had way less room to work with. The hip-hop world was split down the middle trying to figure out how to process all this. In a culture where cooperating is seen as one of the biggest violations you can commit against your own circle, this situation had everyone arguing about loyalty, survival, and what street code even means anymore.
And you know, this is a homicide case. This is a high stakes case. You want to ensure that there is integrity in the prosecution of this case because this family does deserve justice. And there isn't a person that deserves to be wrongfully convicted or in prison for something that they didn't do.
People were debating nonstop, trying to figure out whether Bortlen broke the street code or if he was just being smart and protecting himself in a situation that was already stacked against him. And Charleston White didn't hold back at all. His comments cut deep and had plenty of folks heated. He said plain and simple that if someone harms their own friends, they should face the consequences, no matter how famous or talented they are. His opinion represented one side of the community that believes accountability should come before loyalty when something that serious goes down. This plea deal marked a huge shift in a case that's been gripping the hip-hop world since 2018, with Bortlen no longer sitting next to Melly as a co-defendant, and possibly giving prosecutors at least some limited cooperation. Melly's defense team had to prepare for challenges they never had to deal with before. Melly's retrial is now set for January 2027, but it got pushed back because the appeals court still has to decide whether prosecutors can use certain digital evidence to argue Melly's alleged motives, his claimed gang associations, and what they call his state of mind. Those rulings could change the entire direction of the retrial.
I hope they get his kid life. I hope he never gets out of prison. Yeah. He killed his friends.
These delays created even more problems for everyone involved. The new prosecutors have to study thousands of pages of reports and testimony from the first trial just to get caught up. And Melly's new defense team has to rebuild their entire approach now that Bortlen's status in the case has changed completely. Even with all the legal moves being made, every side is dealing with pressure they didn't expect. The stakes in this case still haven't changed. They're just as heavy as they were on day one. Melly is still facing 2 counts of first-degree tragedy, and if he's convicted, the pass penalty is still on the table under Florida's updated law. And with the new rules only requiring 8 jurors to vote for execution instead of all 12, the pressure on this young man is more intense than ever. But the fight for justice in this case goes way deeper than courtroom motions and legal loopholes. For the families of Anthony Williams and Christopher Thomas Jr., justice means someone being held accountable for taking their loved ones away. That's the closure they've been waiting years for. For Melly's supporters, justice means making sure an innocent man doesn't get sentenced to eliminate for something he didn't do. And for the broader community, justice means the trial has to be fair. The rules followed, the evidence handled right, and the verdict based on facts instead of fame, emotions, or public pressure. Legal analyst Safa Robinson-Farah stressed how important it is to get this retrial right because mistakes in a case this serious can't be undone. One thing everyone agrees on is that this case already changed the lives of every single person connected to it. 2 young men lost their lives on October 26, 2018. 2 families lost their sons forever. Bortlen is now serving years in state prison for admitting he helped cover up what happened. And Melly is standing in a courtroom fighting for his future, with the possibility of an eliminate sentence still hanging over him if the retrial goes against him. Whether real justice gets served in the end depends on how the legal system handles this retrial. With brand new prosecutors, brand new defense attorneys, and a completely different legal landscape than the one this case started with. The 2027 retrial is shaping up to look way different from the 2023 courtroom showdown that ended in a mistrial. But the questions that matter most in the streets are still the same. What truly went down on October 26, 2018? Who fired the shots that took 2 young lives that night? And can the justice system finally bring closure to the families while making sure the right person is held responsible? Those answers won't be known until January 2027, when YNW Melly steps back into that courtroom and faces the judge and jury once again. Until then, all anyone can do is wait and watch how this story unfolds. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to SpillHood for more updates, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters, and I'll see you in the next one.